I'm Sarah Fensky, and this is the 314. Every episode, we sit down with St. Louisans who know what makes this place tick. Together, we explore why things are the way they are and how we can make them better. This episode of the 314 podcast is sponsored by St. Louis Art Museum's Corporate Partner Program. Everyone loves the Muny. St. Louis's beloved outdoor theater has packed in crowds for 106 years now. And last Sunday, the Muny was awarded the Tony Award for Regional Theaters. Artistic director and executive producer Mike Isaacson flew to New York City to accept that high honor. And I'll put this part bluntly. Mike is the reason the Muny is both a critical and popular success. He's widely recognized as one of the smartest guys working in theater today. But as he explained to me when we sat down last Friday, he had a wildly unusual path to the theater. Mike also opened up about his thoughts on St. Louis, which is not his hometown. And that, he told me, may be one reason that he can see it so clearly. Stay tuned after our conversation to hear from St. Louis Magazine staff writer Ryan Kroll, who will tell us all about his latest blockbuster reporting. So, Mike Isaacson, welcome.
It's great to be here.
So I have to start with congratulations. This is huge news. The Muny getting the 2025 Regional Theater Tony Award. That is happening this weekend. How big is that?
It's big. I try to be low key and stuff, but this is it is big. It means a lot to everybody there. We have worked really, really hard on this theater and this transformation and everything that's happened in the last decade or so. And we're really proud of the work and what we're doing because it's singular. It's unlike anything else in the world. But the thing that has really, I did not anticipate after the announcement, there are literally thousands of people around the country, some around the world, who feel connected at this moment. Like, this theater has a lifespan and has affected so many lives, people in the seats, people who've worked there, and they all feel a part of this, which actually makes me the proudest. It is theirs. It is ours. It is a big idea that has involved so many, and that's really satisfying. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just the ownership, I think, that all of St. Louis feels for the Muny. I was surprised. This was a couple weeks ago when we began to learn that the National Endowment for the Arts was cutting grants, and it affected so many local organizations. And I reached out to the Muny spokesman saying, okay, how big of a hit did you guys get? And he said, actually, we don't get any of that money. We're only supported by donors, and we're supported by ticket sales.
Yeah.
You guys have such incredible buy-in. It's very unusual, I think, amongst theaters.
A huge anomaly. And the history there is really through, I'm going to say, the 80s. They could get by with just ticket sales and really not that much philanthropy. Now, you go to the early days when the mayor would knock on the doors and say, here's the bill, pay up. I mean, that original model, the original idea of the Muny guarantors, this is insane. And this is how beautiful it was. If you were a Muny guarantor, you signed up. And they would do the shows in the season, they do the ticket sales. And if there was a deficit, they divided it up between all the Muny guarantors, and people wrote a check.
These were just citizens who'd
Just
agreed
citizens of St. Louis.
to support this venture.
Yeah. Like, is that mind-boggling?
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't do that today.
You couldn't do that today. But the attachment and the sense of this is our theater, we want it to exist. It was a civic idea. So what happened in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they could sort of find a way. And then definitely in the 80s and 90s where everything changed. And one of the things that when I came in was sort of with my MBA and Broadway producing and stuff and sort of looking at the trends, I was like, we got to get ready for something else. We're not ready. And God love the board. They were like, what do we need to do here? And Denny was great. We all sort of talked about it and really had to build up the fundraising arm. But, most people think we get ZMD number money. We don't.
And that's the Zoo Museum District.
Or, federal money. We don't. There have been occasional RAC grants for specific projects and things, God love them. But we have existed outside of that ecosystem. Yeah.
And when you say 80s, 90s, you said, hey, we got to do something different. What were you talking about there?
Well, you could see what the well, boy, what it was. You don't want to criticize the past, but all I can say is the moment when I walked in, it was beginning to not work.
The financial model.
The whole thing, I would say, in the sense that the work on stage was not what it needed to be to keep an audience and keep it growing. Here's the way I describe it: that for whatever reasons, choices I'm going to say my predecessor made, and I honor those. It was beginning to feel like a museum. It was about, and the thing about the Muny was it was always central to St. Louis's life. It was a place for everyone. So how do we get something that draws a bigger audience, excites them, and returns it to a present tense? That's what I wanted to do. Like the Muny should always be, hey, what's happening at the Muny this summer? And everyone actually is interested and cared, and, that was an aesthetic, change. I mean, my predecessor's bias was he never did any musical like after 1964.
He was doing the classics,
he was
Rodgers and Hammerstein.
Right, and only doing that. And if you looked at that, what was odd to me about that, and again, I wasn't there, is if you really looked at the history of the Muny, there was always this great sense of variety. It was the shows off of New York. It was, and that makes sense if you're going to do a big civic idea, something for everyone, right? So it had sort of gotten and then the producing model was a factory model, which when you began, would make sense. And what I mean by that is people would come in and create shows there, and the perspective was, here's how we make our shows here, figure out how to do your show this way. So everything, if you really took a step, kind of began to look and feel the same, no matter what it was. And audiences' tastes have grown. I mean, also during this period, you have to look at what's going on. Touring Broadway exploded. People were seeing more shows. They were seeing greater variety of design. Like everything was bigger and better. So we needed to catch up with sort of my opinion on what it was and what I hope to do. Now, to be honest, I had no idea whether I could do it. I had no idea whether it could happen. It was, as I said to my husband, look, this is either 2 years or there's a journey here. Like there was no middle ground.
Yeah.
No middle ground. And, beautifully, fortunately, I could tell right away the audience was like, oh, let's go. Like you could just feel this energy, like, okay,
Was that about the quality, or was that about bringing in some of these newer shows, things that felt more contemporary?
Both.
It's interesting because so many theater companies, including some locally, have really struggled with this in recent years, how to bring something that feels new and vibrant, but not alienate that core audience.
Yeah.
What do you think the key was for the Muny being able to do that? You said they were immediately on board.
Well, I mean, I think do I have the exact answer? I don't know. I think one of the ideas that offer is, that audience had seen a lot of musical theater. They know they're a really smart audience when it comes to musicals. You can't fake it with this crowd. They've been living with them in their lives. So that was kind of the soil to grow something into. I think, in some senses, it wasn't. I mean, there's a difference between new and there's a difference between someone sitting there and going, I don't know what this is. And I think that's what happened with a lot of theater. Here's what I would offer is the challenge. Sometimes you'll go see a piece of theater and it's only for, I'm going to just say theater people, meaning people who are interested in the form of theater. And that's a market, but it's not a very big market.
Right.
And the Muny and its mission is to, like, I love that my job in this day and age is to protect the middle, something for everybody. Let's meet in the middle of the city. Let's meet in the middle of the park. Let's that idea, which we're being, culturally, everything sort of pulled into our corners. This remains as we all gather, right? So you can't go to the extremes because that's not what it is. So part of it was, and then it was hiring, honestly, better talent and designers and directors. But then what happened backstage brilliantly, my production supervisor, Tracy Utzmeyers, and everybody, there is nothing created at the Muny now in the same manner, form, process than it was a decade ago. It was rocket science. Every 15 minutes is planned, how we do it. We spend months creating the work and all the designers and everybody connecting. And then as we added and embellished new departments, video, changed costumes, everything, wardrobe. That's a sweeping amount of change. And again, everybody was used to, this is how we do it, that. So it was a huge transition. And then, I'll be forever grateful to the board. I got about 6 or 7 years into it, and Denny, and we had the conversations. We were coming up on the 100th. And my point of view is either we get to 100 and we say, hey, what a ride, and what now? Or if we're going to keep creating musical theater, we got to redo this whole thing, because we can't do it with all this 1930s technology.
Yeah.
And God love the board and the community. Everyone stepped up. We love this place. What do we need to do? I mean, that was mind blowing. And that stage now, what we can do, it's so exciting. It is so exciting.
This was the Muny's first ever major capital campaign.
Major campaign.
$100 million.
$100 million.
And you guys raised it so quickly.
It was like 5 years. Yeah.
People just
Yes.
had this attachment. They
Yes.
were willing to put their money where their heart was.
Yes. And, and the arts, you're always raising money, commercial anniversary, that's part of it. And it was this moment, and it was such an honor to the legacy of the place, of the community understanding. And it was also a brave step internally, because they weren't really comfortable talking about need, because they had to do it, so that's a new language. And how do you do that? And God love, Denny was here at the time, and everybody. And then an amazing fundraising team stepped up. And, when you're introducing that to patrons, when they haven't heard it it's sort of like, wait, what? Are you guys okay? No, you really have to.
Should we worry about the Muny?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So it was a sort of delicate dance. But once people understood and we could show them, here's what this will do, then it just, people were so generous. It was unbelievable. And I still think that is the highest capital campaign for a theater in this country.
It was huge.
Yeah.
I do want to mention one other thing, and that it strikes me every time I go to the Muny, and I really like going to the theater, so I go up to a lot of different theaters around town. Your audience is younger than almost anywhere else I can think of. It's also more racially diverse.
Yeah.
This is not the sort of classic old white St. Louis theater-going audience that some theaters have worked really hard to change and not been able to crack that nut. What do you think the key for that is? As you say, you want to do things that are in the middle, but you are reaching communities in St. Louis that maybe are harder to reach for the theater.
I don't have the exact answer. I think a couple of things are involved is we work really hard in all of our communication and messaging to get across everybody's welcome. This is yours. Come try this. I think it helps that it's a summer night under the stars. People feel, everyone dresses the same, so you get rid of class. Everyone's sort of casual and human. And I think word of mouth is, my craziest of dream visions was, through the arc of my time here, is by the end of it, word around town is somebody says, the Muny's doing Come From Away, should I go? And the immediate response is, trust me, if it's at the Muny, it's going to be great. Like, that was the goal, right? And, each year we've moved closer and closer. So I think the work's exciting and attracting it. But also in terms of young people, the advantage is musicals are in.
They are.
I'm very lucky to be doing during this period, and that's a whole different 4-hour lecture. But you can go, My Fair Lady in 56, to when everyone in the country had that album and knew that, to Hamilton in 2015. It was the same moment. It went up, it went down, it went up and down. The Disney film phenomenon created a whole audience. Like, all these things came together. So musicals as a form of entertainment and of experience are really popular and connected to the culture in a way that's really nice.
We're talking today to Mike Isaacson. He's been the artistic director and executive producer of the Muny since 2012. And now a word from our sponsor. Make a real impact in your community and boost your business by becoming a corporate partner of the St. Louis Art Museum. Through the Corporate Partner Program, you'll support free year-round programs and help bring over 125,000 people closer to the arts and to each other. Plus, your investment contributes to strengthening St. Louis as a regional center for economic growth and talent attraction. Learn more at slam.org. And now back to our conversation with Mike Isaacson, artistic director and executive producer of the Muny, heading to New York, going to get the Tony Award for Regional Theater, a huge feather in the Muny's cap. Mike, in addition to all the great work you've done at the Muny, you have such an interesting background. You got your start in theater, of all things, as a theater critic.
I know. I usually try to bury that fact, and there you throw it out there, Sarah.
I-
There's the red meat on the table. Uh-oh.
I'm just so intrigued by this because I honestly can't think of another example in history of somebody who's managed to go from, being the critic, presumably taking a shot here and there, to being such a booster and to mounting such big work. How did that happen?
Boy, it's a long journey. So to make it really simple, everything was self-taught. I grew up in a household. We moved around a lot. And when we would get to a new city, home base for me was always the public library. And that's where I discovered like cast albums and script and this whole world. Now, I didn't see any real theater till probably junior high or high school.
Wow.
But it was this conceptual thing. And I loved the albums and the music. And then I would go and I realized there was this thing called Variety. And there would be it was like putting together this puzzle to me that was fascinating.
And Variety, the publication.
The show
covers-
business Bible. Yeah. So I was just reading constantly about all this. And then the journalism thing came into play because I had a bachelor's in English from St. Louis U. God love them, they gave me a scholarship. And I had no idea what I was going to do. I ended up at McDonnell Douglas for a while.
Doing like corporate communications?
Yeah, corporate communications. But I had a great boss. And he said, if you want to freelance on the side, I'm fine with that. So I did. And Jeff Pfister moved to town and bought what was then the old Clayton West End Word. I don't know what variation is now. And I casually knew him. And I called him and said, do you need a theater critic? And he said, yeah, but I can't pay. And I was like, that's fine. I just want the tickets. I mean, I had no money, right? So I did that and I began writing and I aped everything. You read that stuff and it just gets absorbed. And I had done it for a college newspaper too.
Yeah.
And so and when I was in college, I ushered at the Fox. That was my PhD program. I would see those musicals 3-4 times and study them. And then when you're like, my approach as a critic was it was very different. I was always taking it, what are you giving the audience? What is that conversation? There's a school of criticism that many subscribe to that absolutely drives me nuts, which is they'll sit down and go, well, why are you doing a restoration comedy? Like, and you're just like, well, then why are you writing about it?
Right.
Or
you
whatever
chose
it is.
to go.
Right. In other words, my thing is if you're going to do a restoration comedy, great. I'm going to see how well you did at that endeavor. How is it, like that? And so it was a different way of looking that was good. And ironically, one of my first reviews, there's some, I've actually read them out to some colleagues sometimes. There's some reviews of some Muny productions that are quite interesting.
Oh, you had thoughts about the Muny.
Yeah, I was reviewing it.
And this was when the Muny was not in its
Yeah, it was
artistic
sort
heyday.
of up and down. But one of the first people who called me, like after the review, was Paul Blake. He said, "Who are you?" And I was like, blah, blah, blah. He was like, "This is a well-written review." And I was like, "Well, thanks, dude." It was crazy.
And Paul Blake.
He had my job at the Muny. He was the artistic director. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that all sort of came about. And then I had a chapter where I worked at St. Louis U, first in publications, then for the university president. And there was just a moment where I had an MBA, all this theater writing, and this sort of institutional experience at SLU. And then there was a magical moment where David Fay, who was then running the Fox, we had a lunch, and I came out of that lunch, and it literally opened the door to my life.
Because he said, you can work, you can be a producer.
We were having lunch, blah, blah, blah. And I had literally, this is way too deep. I had an amazing job at the university. I was this vice president and all this stuff. And I was like, yeah, I'm in the wrong place. This is crazy. And a whole series of incidents got me there. And so I quit, not knowing where I was going. Now I was finishing an MBA, so there was a little there. And I took him to lunch. And to this day, I don't know where the guts came from. He said, "Well, how are things at the university?" And I said, "Well, actually, I'm leaving." He goes, "Oh, what do you want to do?" And to this day, I don't know how this happened. I looked at him, I said, "Oh, I think I should come work for you." And he looked at me. I just saw him in New York a couple of weeks ago. And we had this conversation. As it was going on, I was like, he's really taking this seriously. And then he turns out, he says, "Well, that's interesting. Fox Theatricals," which is what it was called, we're taking our first show to Broadway, and I'm realizing I need some help. So I sort of knew what I was dealing with, and I could tell there was kind of this, he sort of alluded to sort of this Murphy Brown situation. He did a lot of bad assistants, right? And I said to him, "Well, this summer I'm sort of covered by the university, so give me something to do. I'll do a project for you pro bono. And if you like the work and you see that this works together, the deal is you hire me on Labor Day. That's exactly what happened. And then 5 weeks after that, I go to New York. I see this workshop of this musical and come back. And I'm like, I think we should do this musical, this new stage adaptation of Thoroughly Modern Millie. And there we are.
And he agreed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of people. It's a whole thing.
Sure.
I'm telling it very simply. But yeah. And suddenly there it was.
And so you had felt like you were in the wrong place. Once you were finally there working for the theater, you were there at the Fox. Did you immediately know this is the right place?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, theater people are kind of beasts, you know. Well, not beasts. What I say is, no matter who you are in the theater, you probably had a reason you needed to run away to join the circus.
Sure.
That's why I love them. I love talented people. I love craftspeople. I love stagehands. Like you're doing, you know. And the thing about theater is, there's a famous quote. I got to figure out who said it. Google it. But it's not. The truth is about no matter who you are in theater, it's always blue collar work. You're just a doer, and you have deadlines and responsibilities, and you have to deliver. And I love that ethic because that's who I am. I'm a doer. I mean, that's why I love the job with Biondi. Like, stick me in the back room and just, you know, I don't need I love that. I love the idea of producing because at the end of the day, it's about other people. You've done your contribution. And the other thing about theater that fits in with my, whatever we're going to call psychology, is you can't look at a piece of theater, particularly the Muny, and think it's about any one person. It is truly the communal, the collective, the possibility of what people can do together, which is why the Muny is this profound statement about St. Louis. Because you look at that and you go, well, I don't know who's back there, but clearly they're getting along. Like they're figuring something out.
They have worked well
They
together.
have worked well together. And that message is so important to me for that audience because it's all St. Louisans. Look what we can do. Look at this extraordinary endeavor that comes from us. And I you know, again, not to go deep into it, but I moved around a lot as a kid, came here for college, and fell in love with this city, and the city gave me my life, my deepest friendships, the love of my life, my husband, like, you know, everything. And I think it's easier to love St. Louis if you're not from here. It's a really interesting thing.
Why do you think that is?
You know what? I gave up. I don't know. Be somebody from St. Louis, you know, figure it out. I don't know what that is.
But we transplants,
Yeah.
we have an appreciation for this.
Total. And, you know, when friends come from New York or, you know, people from the Broadway community come out and stuff, they're like, oh my God, this city, you know, like, you know, I don't have the answer to the question. It's very, I don't know. It's hard sometimes, you know, and that's why this moment as a moment, giving this community pride really matters to me.
To get that national recognition.
To get that recognition, to go, look what we've done, and this is a great city to live, you know? I mean, one of my, you know, I just think in a sort of structural way, like, I mean, our Muny Kids and Teens program right now is so unbelievable. It is like top nationally, like it is the best place if you're a high schooler to think like, you know, there's people who will move companies because they want their kids to do this kind of thing. Like it creates a certain kind of energy. And then, like, as you alluded to, you go into that audience and you see the incredible just diversity of everybody who's there. And you go, wow, this is, I mean, Janine Tesori, the Tony Award winning composer and a dear friend of mine, she came out like 2 seasons ago and she just kept going. She goes, I cannot believe this audience. I can't believe what's going on here. And I was like, yeah, it's theirs. There's a connection in this verse. She goes, you have packs of like teenage boys watching chess. And I'm like, yeah, you know, and you know, so I'm very lucky that the form I love and the thing I do. When I worked at McDonnell Douglas, I was in corporate PR and we were right by the runways. And whenever the F-15 would come in Atlanta, or one of those guys, there were like 4 guys who would jump up from their cubes and desks and go running the windows. And they were like 4-year-old boys, right? And I thought that was so interesting. I thought that's who you need to be in a place.
Yeah.
Like the central idea of what it is inspires you. And I've been very lucky to eventually connect that for me in my career.
That you're in the right place,
right,
the right time, the right job.
Right.
You have had, I think it's 23 different Broadway musicals and plays and national tours you've produced. You've already won more than 34 Tony Awards through those productions. The productions have won them. Not you. I see you wanting to correct me, but
yeah.
But I mean, you could have easily left St. Louis. You could be in New York doing this full time there. Is it just about the magic of the Muny that has kept you here?
No, I mean, what has kept me here is the life and the relationships I built here. And also, I mean, here's the thing. If that question, like you go to New York, the rules are set. They've always been set. You know what they are. It's a city that runs on money. It's a city runs on, like, it's clear. Here's the handbook. See how you do. What was interesting to me about the Muni at this point is St. Louis is still a city finding itself, rediscovering itself. So for this institution to be here doing that while that's going on, I mean, I was here during the 80s and 90s where I described it when all the daddies left the city, right? All those companies fled to Texas or whatever.
Yeah.
And the place was a patriarchy. And suddenly, daddy's gone. What are we doing? And how are we figuring it out? And then subsequent moments in Michael Brown and everything becoming the city we need to be now. And I loved this institution that everything's, being a part of that transformation or that place where we're going.
It feels like some people have gotten frustrated along that journey. I think I've said a lot lately, St. Louis has been in kind of a bad mood for a couple of years now, kind of coming out of COVID. People feel more down on this place than
America
ever.
has been in a bad mood coming out of COVID.
Fair.
We're not alone in that.
Fair.
New York's been in a bad mood.
But you mentioned you'll have out-of-towners come. New Yorkers
Yeah.
will be here, and they're blown away
Yeah.
by what they see when you show them St. Louis. And yet there's so many St. Louisans who don't seem to see that right now. Do you think we can change that?
Yeah. I mean, look at if we can change the Muni, which is the ocean liner metaphor for St. Louis, the rest is possible. I mean, it's not easy. I mean, it's never easy. And part of what's also gone on in this whole, if you're going to say judging St. Louis and stuff, and I've seen this with my nieces, and you see this with young people. We have built into the American ethic that you have to leave your town to go do something.
Sure.
Like that's in every city in the country. Like I must, it's, and then particularly New York and the coast get the benefits of that because those are the media centers. So we set friends in a New York loft and everyone thinks this, and they all go and half come back, but there is this thing that's just going to happen. Kids need to leave the roost. Is that going to be the same in 10, 20 years? I don't know. It feels like there's a shift. And we build this conversation of investment in your own community and building long term and what that is. I mean, the reality is, though, if you look at a lot of that, what's going on in the South and the Southwest, it's because, where do the businesses go to? Where is that economic engine?
Right.
And that's where, Greater St. Louis, they're all working on that, That's what it has to be, and how to, everything that's going on with the biotech stuff. That's the big future.
Right.
So it's those conversations, and I mean, I just read about them. Endeavors are happening, but there is something to say, and you saw this. I mean, we're really riffing here, but post-COVID, people began to understand the real benefits of a mid-sized city lifestyle.
Just the fact that
Yeah.
one can go to the Muni.
Yes. Yeah.
There's all this art
Right.
around us.
Right. But the fact that within a 5 square mile from the Muni, you can have, and I will say this proudly, I'm going to give you a night of musical theater that stands against anything in this country. It is going to be excellent. I'm going to put down there. And then you can drive 3 miles to Maplewood, and we're all in the parking lot at the barbecue and beer thing. Right. That's fantastic. Like in terms of city life and that. So, and in the cities, and they become really challenging to manage, and everyone's trying to figure out. We're seeing that. I mean, it's really funny because people have this really mythic idea of New York right now. You walk up Broadway, half the storefronts are empty for lease. Times Square is one of the reasons Broadway is struggling right now. Is Times Square is a real challenge with the number of people and homeless and that. I mean, they're working on it, but it's, there's no place that you sort of go, okay, this, I mean, we're in a period here. Everyone's going to figure it out. So, I don't know. And maybe I'm a, cockeyed optimist, but I just see, I think one of the things about the Muni the value that comes through that I think is directly St. Louis is there is a kindness and an ethic to the people here. And I cherish that. And it is a culture we have backstage. And I feel like that is singular to what happens here. And I'm not very articulate about it, but for the most part, like I see people really endeavoring with goodwill. Mistakes are made, maybe frequently, but no one's giving up.
Mike Isaacson, I love that you have shared your thoughts on the bigger picture here. I love that you worked in a reference to my favorite musical of all time. This has been a great conversation. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Mike Isaacson is the artistic director and executive producer of the Muny. In just a moment, St. Louis Magazine staff writer Ryan Kroll joins us for the closer. Ryan broke the story that an autonomous car company was in St. Louis this past week. Yes, I'm talking about self-driving cars, and he'll tell us what he learned. But first, a word from our sponsor. This episode of the 314 podcast is supported by the Missouri History Museum. St. Louis employers take pride in their city. Share that excitement with your team, whether they're new to the Lou or lifelong locals, and take part in the New to St. Louis STL 101 tour from the Missouri Historical Society. Hear from local history experts, explore neighborhoods, oddities, and landmarks, and then wrap it up with a happy hour featuring iconic St. Louis foods and local beers. Who knew team building could be this much fun? Book your tour today at mohistory.org/STL101. And now for the closer. St. Louis Magazine staff writer Ryan Kroll had a fun scoop this week. He learned that a company called Neuro was in St. Louis. The Mountain View, California company aims to create a, quote, scalable, generalizable autonomy stack. In plain English, that's technology that could be applied to everything from delivery vans to robo-taxis to personal cars, making them autonomous, or as people like me call it, self-driving. So, kind of a crazy story. Ryan, the genesis is that you spotted one of these Neuro cars out in the wild?
Yeah, actually, I was on this past Friday night. My wife and I were out for our anniversary on South Grand, and we saw the car drive by, and it had this sort of like R2D2 looking thing on top. And it said, I forget exactly what the phrasing was, but the words autonomous were printed on the sides. I thought, oh, wow, that's interesting. Is that car, it was no human driving that car. So I kind of filed it away, and then started looking into it on Monday and found out that it was, this company Neuro had come to town.
And so you thought maybe you had spotted a self-driving car. Was this car actually driving itself?
So no, there was a human driving the car, but I wasn't super far off the beat. It turns out this Neuro company is, like you said, trying to make technology that can be then employed to make all sorts of different vehicles, autonomous, self-driving. But it turned out that this Neuro company was putting their, technology like radars and LiDAR and other sensors on a car that was then driven by a human that was traveling through 40 cities in the United States, including St. Louis, gathering data, trying to study both roads and intersections and drivers, and then using that data to train the AI.
So is the idea here that we're a future growth city for Neuro, that they've got their eye on bringing their vehicles here?
Well, I don't know about that specifically, but what I do know is that they're interested in cities like St. Louis because they didn't use this word, but speaking to their people, the vibe that I got was they wanted sort of like, to use a kind term, they wanted like quirky driving cities. They wanted streets that had like unusual intersections, sort of difficult to navigate turns, that kind of thing. They didn't use the word erratic drivers, but they basically said erratic drivers. And
so they're talking about us.
Yeah, no, I don't think this person knew it. They were in Mountain View, California, but they were describing St. Louis to a T. And they wanted bad weather as well. So this is a good time of year for heavy rain. Because the idea being that, I guess it's like swinging the baseball bat with the donut on, right? You train this AI driver in the sort of the meanest street you could find. And then when it's sort of in, Pleasantville or whatever, it's going to be no problem.
So yeah, we're no Pleasantville. I think they found the right spot.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it turns out AI driving, autonomous driving, whatever you want to call it, not here in St. Louis yet, but it could very well be coming. We may even be helping this company create autonomous vehicles. And I know you have a lot of takes about sort of this AI boom, like Chat GPT and things like that. I'm curious. I've never actually asked you what's your thought on self-driving vehicles?
Well, I feel like you're kind of outing me here a little bit. I'm a Luddite, I don't like new technology, and I know that doesn't always serve me well. There've been so many times I've predicted this will come to nothing, and it turned out to be like the iPhone. I just have no
Mm,
idea what I'm talking about. But I will say when it comes to self-driving cars, I used to live out west. I still have a lot of friends in the Phoenix area. I still have a lot of friends in California. And these vehicles are now there. I think Waymo is kind of the industry leader out there where they're doing some pilot projects of this stuff where you can even like hail an Uber and there's no driver. It's just a Waymo that's driving you around. This has not always worked. Like in 2018, there was this really notorious case where a bicyclist in Tempe, which is a suburb of Phoenix, got killed by one of these things. And then there was also an incident in 2023. This was in San Francisco where a pedestrian was dragged for 20 feet before the self-driving car could figure out how to stop. And I understand because I have covered the issue of traffic violence. I know that real life drivers have done much more heinous things and that they do it all the time. But there is something uniquely terrifying about a robot doing it. And as much as I'm like super skeptical of St. Louis drivers, I'm more skeptical of the robot. I don't want them on the road too. You think I'm just a Luddite?
no, I don't. I mean, it could be something as simple as you kind of prefer the devil you know, the one that you don't. And there is something just so much more terrifying. That's like why a plane crash is scarier than a car accident, sort of in our collective imagination, because you don't have you perceive yourself as having less control over the plane crash. But what you said is really interesting. It kind of brings up, I think, the I feel like St. Louis. It kind of gets back to this idea as St. Louis being a good training ground for these things, because on the one hand, like you said, drivers are sort of generally kind of bad. So maybe the AI would be better. But I was doing a little research for the story, and it looks like that even the sort of companies themselves will acknowledge that there is difficulty with these autonomous vehicles when it comes to dealing with, intersections that aren't at that 90-degree angle, quirky intersections, and then also dealing with these sort of erraticism of everyone else on the road. And those are all things that St. Louis has sort of in abundance. So on the one hand, like I feel like the kind of arguments on both sides for these self-driving cars are like just St. Louis is like an exaggeration of why it could be good and why it could be awful. So it's really, really interesting. I never thought about sort of the city being, overlapping with this sort of nascent technology until just a few days ago.
Yeah, no, this story raises a ton of interesting issues. Something else that's happening in a city I used to live in LA, apparently with the unrest there. Some people have like summoned these self-driving cars just so they can blow them up or light them on
Mhm.
fire. Like these are dangerous weapons that don't have a driver in control of them. That makes me nervous too. But so I'll get off my soapbox. Last question for you. You have a lot of contacts in the cyclist community. How do they feel about this?
Yeah, I asked them just kind of generally, what are your thoughts on autonomous vehicles? And they were generally skeptical. And for the most part, they were skeptical for the reasons that anyone else would be. A few interesting ideas that kind of surfaced was this idea that it's kind of in the utopian vision of AI or autonomous cars, you know, we would be able to like do work or take a nap or play with our kids or whatever while we're going to where we need to go. So on the one hand, that's great, but on the other hand, that's just going to make us more reliant on cars, which they don't like. So that is kind of one demerit in their mind. But the most interesting thing I heard from the folks I reached out to was someone said, this really sounds like the trolley system that St. Louis used to have up until the car companies, ripped it out of the ground. And he just was like very sort of upset or, he was like a good sport about it. He was like grinning at the sort of irony here, but the fact that the car companies are trying to sell us back a sort of new and updated version of this thing they ripped away from us, whatever, like 100 years ago or whatever. So I really appreciated that sort of long view of history.
Well, Ryan, I know you're not talking about the loop trolley. You're talking about the old fashioned trolleys that people actually took. But man, I just feel like anytime you bring the trolley into a St. Louis conversation, people go, ee. So
No, I'm talking about the one, the pre World War II trolleys. Yes, not the
no.
not its sort of newer, more infamous incarnation.
Well, it's fair to say this is a story you're going to stay on. We'll be right there with you. Ryan Kroll, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
And that is Ryan Kroll, staff writer for St. Louis Magazine. I'm Sarah Fensky, and that's the 314 for today. You can find out more in our podcast show notes and at stlmag.com. You can also find me and Ryan every day in your inbox. That's thanks to St. Louis Magazine's fantastic free newsletter, St. Louis Daily. It's a fresh take on St. Louis with insight and original reporting. You'll find stories you don't find anywhere else, like Ryan's story about self-driving cars. Sign up at stlmag.com/newsletters. The 314 is a production of St. Louis Magazine. I'm Sarah Fensky, and this is The 314. See you next time.